What's going on, guys? We're back again this week with another excellent guest. This is the DeFi Crypto Alliance show where we focus on crypto and real estate. We're doing our best to be the bridge to help people that are entrepreneurs and real estate investors understand what we feel like is the biggest opportunity over the next few years, that being crypto. So if those are topics that are interesting to you, you're in the right place. We're pumped to have everybody this morning. Like I said, excellent guest. Corey, go ahead and intro our guest after you intro yourself.
Absolutely. Corey Geary here, and you're absolutely right. We are in the right place at the right time where we're at with the economy, where we're at with the crypto cycles, where we're at with Pulsechain launch, and we want to use cryptocurrency as a wealth creation tool and then use real estate as a wealth preservation tool. And we want to take as many friends as we possibly can along this ride. And it's been an absolute blast, man. And I'll tell you what, in every niche I really get into, or what, really want to learn about, like with real estate, I would get people who are much smarter than me, much more ahead of the curve than me, and I would really bend my ear to them every time they would talk. And there are people in the cryptocurrency space that I feel the same way about, who are smarter than me. And I always say I want to be the dumbest person in the room, and I really mean that. I like to find people who are just light years ahead of me, so when they talk, I sit down and take notes. Well, this gentleman we have on today is one of those guys. I've been following him since the beginning of my crypto journey, and he is an absolute gigabrain when it comes to just DeFi, Pulsechain, liquid loans, everything going on in the ecosystem. Man, Wallrus, I thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it, man. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you came from, why crypto, maybe some horror stories of getting wrecked, and how you found Rich at Heart.
Yeah, man. Appreciate y'all so much. I think you way oversold me. If you'll give me just a minute, I can call some guys that fit that description that are like a lot savvy in space and all that stuff. That was way too high praise. I appreciate it, guys. Yeah. So, I mean, man, I kind of want to just leave your intro, man. That way oversold me. So, yeah, guys, I'm Wallrus with 2 L's. I basically, most of my like forward facing stuff in follow crypto has always been Pulsechain, and then some Pulsechain on top. So, the original like discovery of like kind of crypto, that side of it, I feel like that's the part that most people are kind of interested in. And I actually like talking a bit about the early stuff, not so that I can get my like timestamp as an OG or anything like that. But so many people, as you said, I do the exact same thing. If I go into a new space, a new era, like I'm like, who's the killers? Who's savvy? Who resonates with my worldview? Right. Like who can I learn from? Right. And so sometimes when we see that, we'll see people will see me now and think that like this is how I entered the space and like that's what it takes to be savvy or make money. I promise you it's not. So when I very first saw like Bitcoin, it was like so juvenile. I was like, you can buy drugs and rocket launchers with it and the government doesn't control it. Right. And it was that silly. Like it wasn't even sort of like the meta view that we might now talk about of like, you can actually purchase anything. These things are included. It was that dumb. It was like a 19-year-old like seeing a sports car. I was like, man, that's sweet. Boop. So that's how it started. It was that silly. Didn't understand anything. Didn't know anything. All that kind of stuff. I just, the few things I bought, I could have bought anyway. I just literally wanted to use it. I just thought it was neat. Didn't understand how stuff was moving. I just saw that digits moved around and that was it. I mean, it was something between a video game and a bank account, right? It just no understanding. It was just cool. It was just, I just thought it was neat. It was as much being rebellious and ignorant as it was anything sophisticated. And then the other one that I like to bring up about just like how different that worldview was versus what people will hear me say and speak now. I caught a bull run, and at the time I think I had like 3 or 4 grand, and it just got just over 10, right? So it kind of went from like 4 to 5 figures, which most people would see that as like a psychological event, right? And I cannot explain how this went. I went, oh, I've got more Bitcoin. Closed the phone and walked away. Like it didn't even like hit the brain that I had like, I think it was roughly a 3X or something. Right. I'm over here working 40 hours a week grinding. And you guys know, if you're an entrepreneur, 40 hours is part-time. Like I'm working hard. Like this is my mid-20s. I've got all kinds of stuff going on. I just tripled my money without noticing why. And it doesn't even get through my lizard brain. I'm just like, oh, that's cool. More Bitcoin. Click. Just moved on. Didn't even have it. It just did not hit me. I didn't have that kind of an investor mind state. And so it wasn't until the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Core kind of split. That was what actually got me interested. Funny enough, now it's all the tech. I don't care what everybody says. I'm like into like what's going on. at the time, it was purely the people. Hearing some of like the Blockstream devs, Roger Veer, that's what got me introduced to RH eventually.
Oh, geez.
All these guys, like it was like hearing like these were guys that were about like freedom, censorship resistance, understanding finances, wanting to be separate. These guys, even if they had a job, there wasn't a job the way we think of jobs. They had a role, right? That's kind of how I think of myself at LL. So like, Dave and Cece are the founders, like they are bosses, but like that's not how most interactions work. Like I have a role to play there. And that's how these guys operated, even if they worked for Blockstream and these other companies, right? And that really resonated. I was like, this is smart guys with a lot going on who are like shooting their shots at each other. Like this isn't politic games. They're not being sensitive with each other. Like this is smart guys battling out really, really important things that have really big consequences, right? That was super engaging. So that was what really got me captivated, and the hook was kind of set from there. And so from that progression, it was listening to more of RH and, playing around with more of these things. Funny enough, I don't have a lot of like early rec stories, not because of, again, super sophistication. I just kind of liked the story and the people that were involved. So, I mean, like I've lost funds, but no like really good fun ones. Like I never jumped. None of the meme stuff was all that interesting. That wasn't what kind of pulled me in. I kind of got pulled into the great kind of like the pioneer guys and playing 4D chess stuff. So like that was what was appealing to me. So that was kind of that progression. And then eventually with RH, funny enough, I followed RH for a long time, even before Hex launched. And again, that same way of getting at that, I didn't quite have like the investor mind state around crypto. To me, it was just like it's like fantasy football. It was like this interesting thing going on next to what I was doing. So like, I remember all the cool stuff with like, were they going to drop Bitcoin for Bitcoin, in front of Hex, Bitcoin Hex, and like, the CFP and some of that computational stuff about trying to make, proof of work more efficient with all that time, all this kind of cool stuff. That stuff was really engaging. And then didn't buy Hex. Went on for a length of time. I remember telling a few of my buddies that, like, because I talk about sports betting a lot. I actually don't really gamble that much. I like the mental exercise of like, okay, here's what someone's willing to give me on odds. Here's what I think the odds of these events are around stuff I find interesting. And I remember I told buddies when this thing launched that I was like, hey, this thing is going to crush it. I'm literally convincing my friends that I'm smart enough to predict this thing is right, and then didn't bet on it. Now I did get in earlier.
There's your story of being wrecked.
There you go. That's my story of being wrecked. There you go. Exactly. That's how I should frame this from now on. Literally told people, pointed at him and was like, look at this goofy dude here. I like showing them the which video was it? With the girl in the bikini, and he's just like, he's got that big crisp collar on, that loud blazer. I'm like, this guy right here knows more about math than you. That was what was funny to me. So I teased a lot about RH's kind of yin and yang between being a it's not what he does intentionally, but like a provocateur, very flamboyant, along with just absolute just silver bullets as far as intellect. Then that was when I started to pay a lot of attention around the ecosystem, bought in before I got to be more forward facing. But what really captivated me to like participate actively and be involved was just Pulsechain. So if people saw me stumble into the Telegram rooms, do admin work, how to Pulse, all that stuff, you guys have basically seen all my forward facing stuff.
Yep.
Very cool.
And then now I just keep moving wherever there's value. So there weren't enough admins. It got hectic. I did that. There was a bunch of admins that were doing a good job. Went and did kind of How to Pulse. How to Pulse put out a ton of good stuff, kind of pivoted from there. So I basically just kind of keep moving. So, we were doing some of the spaces for a bit. We'll probably get back to those. I think those were helpful. But more and more of the other projects and stuff have got to doing good spaces. So then we pivoted again. There weren't that many podcasts. So now I've got some of the podcasts that'll be rolling out with other guys. There weren't that many people going to events. So if anyone wants to do a podcast, I would really encourage you guys to go crush it, and I'll go do something else. So I just tend to keep moving wherever I think there's something to be done.
Talk about, I think there's a lot of people in the Hex, Pulsechain, PulseX ecosystems that have a lot to give, but aren't necessarily, the tech people. They have different backgrounds, they have different skill sets. I think it's valuable to be able to see how I'd like more of the nitty gritty about how you end up in the places that you have. So you said yourself, you're not the tech guy, you're not the dev, but you keep ending up in these really cool positions to be able to help further the ecosystem. Talk about that more specifically and what people could what people could look at as far as opportunities to be able to apply their own skill sets to help the ecosystem?
That little spot there has actually been really interesting. My journey is interesting to me in a funny way because Jordan Peterson's another one of those great voices I really enjoy, especially before that bender where he ended up having to have all those issues in Russia. I feel like kind of rough for him personally, but right before he kind of had that last episode, that was when he was just laser driven in. But he said, "I'm not really telling you anything you don't already know." And at the time, I didn't really get it, but like reflecting back on my journey, I get that because all the stuff that I would answer, everybody's already going to know. You just got to end up finding somebody who finally gets it into to finally actually listen and understand. So that like the money's not what's going to get you there. You got to love what you do, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. That's what it was. Like most of the things that I've done that I'm really the most proud about, if you had told me what it would have taken along the way, I may not have done them. A lot of like that luck just came from like, this is awesome. I'm excited. I care. I want to contribute. Along the way, I'm pissed off and frustrated. It's too much time. It's too much this. And then I get to the end. I'm like, that was really awesome. I'm really glad I did that. And so that.
Give an example.
I have the best example will be coming out after launch. But even now, like some of the stuff that I'm doing where I'm traveling, doing, again, even for LL, like LL is really a job on top of what I was already doing because so much of even for LL is pushing out Pulsechain, right? It's got to be Pulsechain stuff. And what originally was this idea of like, hey, I can do a lot of these things around other things I've done, but like I've missed out a lot of my godson's football season this time. Just a lot of these things I had going on early, I would have done a lot of other things, but I've overcommitted to them. And now if you had asked me basically 8 months ago, hey, you're going to have to just like lop off this 6 months. You're just not going to have near that balance you'd have between like Web3 work and being able to do these things. I probably would have said no. And now I'm so glad that I was, I think it's Carnegie said, thank God I was too stupid to get in my own way. Yep. That honestly, like, that's this little chapter of my life. That's the theme song. I was too dumb to get in my own way. So there were a lot of personal sacrifices along the way. Even with some of like the admin work, this initially was like Jesse actually from Power City there back when he was Jesse the pit boss, I think. And it was after his pit bull. Yeah, there you go. There's a timestamp. This is a couple of usernames ago for Jesse, right? He asked me to do some admin stuff, and it was basically like, yeah, I'll help, but I don't really help that well. I'm obsessive. So then it was like I was never off. And then eventually, it just spiraled out to like when the Pulsechain sacrifice went on, one of those ones that Papa B likes to bring up. I was on for when the sacrifice went live, I was on for the first 30 hours straight in the voice chat. Wow. I didn't get off. I was cycling between 2 phones and headphones to keep stuff going. And I was charging and talking at the same time. And so if you had asked me, if you start the conversation over and Jesse's like, hey man, you want to give up like a day and a half of your life and maybe cut off 6 months at the end so that you can help these guys? I've been like, no, Jesse, that's stupid. Well, how much does it offer you? Nothing. Jesse, this is a bad deal. I don't really think this sounds that fun, man. But now that it's accomplished and stuff, that stuff I'm super happy with, right? So all those kind of things along the way, there's very much those things where it was just, I like this stuff. I like who I'm doing this stuff with. I find these things to be productive. And it's also that narrative is also, I think, what's really stopped me from getting wrecked. It's not special knowledge, insider knowledge, great crypto this, great math skills or any of that. Because I've really just tried to do what I find to be like plus EV and what's valuable, I never end up chasing shiny things because I don't really care that they're shiny. So that's helped out a lot. It's not, again, it's one of those things. It's not my ability to be like an analyst and look through things, but I just basically have this criteria. Like if I don't think it's net positive, if I don't like the people that are there, I just won't do it.
I like that. It's interesting. I find that to be a similar trait across all of our entrepreneur friends and anybody that's accomplished something remarkable in their life is they have this all-consuming ability that when they like something, they're about it. And that's kind of all that matters. My wife went out of town last week to do some certification stuff. And she said, what are you going to do when I'm gone? I said, honestly, I'm going to feel really comfortable that I can just focus on more crypto stuff in the night since we're not going to be together, like we do that all day, and now I can do it in the night while you're gone. And she's like, she's like, Dane, you have a problem. And I'm like, it's true, but it's a good problem.
When we left Cardone's, me, Gary, and everyone, we were going down to, I don't remember which spot now, which one of the time. I believe this was on the way. We were getting ready to go talk with like the valuetainment guys. So like the picture shows us looking cool with the G-Wagon. What the picture doesn't show is on the way from Tampa to Fort Lauderdale, I'm literally in the back reading Bill 118,
right,
reading legislation on the way because of that same stuff you're talking about, just obsession. So like, I'm just sitting here literally just, But again, those, that's where a lot of that difference will come. Like that kind of obsession, it will, and it's exactly what you're saying there. It separates, man. Like other people who want those things can smell it. Like they'll just bet on that. Like people bet on killers. Like I don't know how Tesla works. I certainly don't know how to make rockets land themselves, but I know that there's one dude in the world that was making flamethrowers, getting high with Joe Rogan. I'm going to bet on that guy. Right. But obsession, there's certain things. It's usually called like the white coat syndrome. If you just put on a white coat, people will just tend to believe you because like white coats are doctors. They're smart. Right. So we tend to use a lot of these like earmarks of something that are hard to quantify, right? So like, why do girls like big, strong guys? Well, because it's really hard to tell who's a black belt in karate, right? But if you're big, I can just bet that you can protect well, right? So like wealth, why is extravagant wealth a big one? Well, it's because how to encompass being a provider, that's kind of hard. But if he's got a Lambo, he can probably afford food, right? So like the same thing with these things here, where if you just, any of these obsessive things that we're talking about, if somebody else sees that in you, I can't get an earmark for like what you've done the last 5 years. But if they're sitting there on a Saturday morning and you're reading regulation, or your wife gives you time and you didn't spend that doing the XYZ thing and you just spend it reading, or any of these other topics, it gives me like insight to what you were doing for the rest of the time. And it's an earmark, right? So like it's like a big box that checks off a lot of these things, where if I'm like, hey, Dane, I need you to go do XYZ thing, because I know you're obsessive. I know that you're not going to come back with an excuse. You're going to come back with a result. And so it's almost not even the results on some of these things. It's like the willingness to just be psychotic and get stuff done that I think is really valuable.
I think that's a trait that every successful entrepreneur has, is that willingness and just basically obsession for going out there and getting it right. I did that in my real estate journey. And if you would, just like you mentioned earlier, if you would have told me in my beginning of my real estate journey, hey, you're going to be doing this, you're going to go through these lawsuits, you're going to go through, and if you would have laid everything out for me, I'd have been like, F that, I'm going to stay in my casino job. I was a blackjack dealer before that. I was like, I'd have to stay dealing cards. There's no way. But now looking back, the person that it made me, I'm so blessed and honored, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened in my life. I always tell everybody real estate saved my life, mentally, spiritually, physically, and financially. So like, but it's just funny how all played out like that. Because you would have told me that in the beginning, I would have done it. But I got so obsessed with the journey of getting to the destination that it worked out, and it worked out great. It changed me for the rest of my life. And now I'm doing the same with crypto, but it's so much more fun.
There's that's something like Rogan and Jocko, David Goggins, all those kind of psycho guys, they lean on the physical stuff, but they're, along with that, like obsessive trait, there's just something powerful about people who do hard things. Like it doesn't even matter what it is. And I think that's one of the things that brings people in crypto together a lot. So one of my favorite things about crypto is you guys ever seen those like zombie apocalypse movies, and XYZ event goes on, and then somehow there's like 14 people together that have nothing in common except for like they're the ones that make it out. I always find those things interesting. Crypto's basically a zombie apocalypse movie. There's just this huge group of people that have no business hanging out together, and somehow we all have something in common, and here we are, and now everybody
it is like that.
Yep. And
wow. And you have like people from all walks of life all coming together
all over.
It's insane. Yeah.
In fact, one of our really good friends, Josh, in fact, Josh might be watching the show right now, but one of our good friends, Josh, were at the Power City event, the concert after the Pulsechain event. And we were sitting there and we kept looking at each other and saying, this is the strangest we haven't been to a party like this because it's such a unique group of people that would never come together otherwise. And it's beautiful. It's really cool to be able to see how that stuff comes together. And that was a blast. Like we had so much fun there and felt just grateful to be able to be around all the people that were there.
Yeah. It's powerful, man. It's really cool stuff.
That's cool. Well, let's talk more about liquid loans. So if you don't mind, explain how you ended up with the liquid loans team, and we'd love to know what you guys have going on there.
For sure. So I officially got on the team in October. And so for me, it was just, again, this kind of like pivoting, where can I find value? More as sort of the Pulsechain ecosystem had kind of grown. A lot of the stuff I was doing, other people were doing really, really well. So
did you feel like you kind of done what you played your role and done what you needed to with the How to Pulse team, and you were looking for the next adventure? Is that kind of what you mean?
A little bit, but usually I almost feel like I kind of wait to get pushed out in a way, but like in a very positive sense, where because again, a lot of the stuff I'm just looking for things to get done. It's cool, right? Actually, just quickly, so this is something I would refer people to go listen to. The CEO from Gymshark, he has a lot of really good content, and how that guy grew his company, I think, is really resonating. Like, he's a very plain speaker with a lot of charisma, so I would reference him. But early on, they hit a big milestone for like a million a year, some like one of those like kind of key psychological revenue model breakpoints. And at that point, he hired a CEO that basically took his job. And the interviewer asked him, like, well, that must have been really hard to like bring on a CEO, give your baby over, take your position away. And he said, the way this really responded, he sent it with just such like nonchalant. He was like, oh, no, that was really easy. And there was kind of a pause. He's like, I had way bigger ambitions for Gymshark than I did for myself. And so that really resonated with me, because that's kind of how I feel is I want all this stuff to really, really work and be really, really cool. And I don't really care what my role ends up being, as long as those end results end up being that. So I just kind of keep going wherever I think stuff's useful. So as soon as I feel like there's an opportunity that I can kind of move on or go do something interesting, and I feel like whatever it was I was trying to achieve in kind of the main previous role is handled, I just pivot.
Cool. Very cool.
Like the How to Pulse, like the site got up to like, I think, 1 million unique hits. I mean, sometimes people do not understand how much traffic that site's had, man. And that's a lot.
That's where I direct everybody who in the beginning, like first check out How to Pulse. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of great work got done there. And then with LL, them being a big project, a lot of sort of like the core Pulsechain narratives were being really, really covered well. So many people are doing a great job, right? You know, K4K has, PulseX tattooed on his back. I always like to bring that guy up because he's a really smart guy who's also, I think, a good balance between obsessive and sort of maxi, but bringing so much value. So I kind of like to highlight those types of people a little bit. We had that across Hex, Pulsechain, and PulseX, in my opinion. So it was kind of like, all right, we have a lot of this stuff really covered. Lots of content. People are doing great stuff. So when those guys talk, it took us a while to sort of figure out how that stuff would fit, because, I'm going to kind of speak my opinion. I didn't want to be like covered in Tinker Symbol stuff, because a lot of the conversations that I get to have in some ways are because I'm not hexakin Wallrus, right? It's not because I don't like any of the stuff we're doing, but then I have to sort of like get people to look past Hex if they don't like it, to have a conversation. Or if I can have a conversation and then bring these things up, that just works out better for my particular ability to communicate. So even now, like, the L's are capitalized. Everyone knows, that I'm part of LL, but like you just don't see that branding as much. So it's easier to come on, and if whoever it is isn't that big a fan of LL, they can still come speak, pick up education, retweet something else I say on these other topics, because they don't feel like it's a shill, right? So that took a little time to get together. But Christian and Dave, I really appreciated how we kind of worked through some of that stuff to make sure that it was very, very positive for them, that I didn't feel like I was, attached in like an unhealthy way as far as what I wanted to say or communicate or work on or any of those things. But it was very beneficial. And essentially it ends up being, hey, we need Pulsechain to be really, really big, or none of this stuff matters. And I was like, oh, great. Well, that's what I like anyway. So this is going to work out perfect. So it's funny, if most people notice, I don't really do that much stuff different, even though that I'm at LL, because of some of their like commercial acumen. So like, the studio's all nice and cool and set up. So I've done things and leveled up and moved around, but I was kind of moving in like the regulation side. I moved into a bunch of that. And then again, a lot of people picked it up. RH is talking more. So I talked less about it. And then I went and did events, right? So like, I just kind of yin and yang as those things get picked up and kind of put into the zeitgeist a little bit.
Yeah, you're more of an ambassador for Pulsechain with a dash of LL. That's what I got. That's how I put the title.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you like it, the part of that is that's naturally like I feel better in that role. Like that works well for me.
Yeah.
The other part is it's also just kind of like logistics, right? So let's say I walk into XYZ Bitcoiner, right? How do I get that guy to come do LL? Hey, let me show you a DApp on a chain that's kind of like ETH. Move, done, lost. The conversion rate is 0. It's a waste of everybody's time. But I can get that guy into Pulsechain. If I can get you into Pulsechain, now I can get you into LL and PulseX and all the other cool stuff that people are building on that I think is really cool and valuable that I talk about.
It's like getting somebody into Hedron or Icosa. You're not going to do that without first getting them into Hex because they have to understand Hex first before they can understand all these other intricacies of like the complications of, I mean, that ecosystem is very in depth, right? And
very in depth. Yeah.
So,
and that's even, just quickly on that note, that's one of the things when sometimes people talk about like scope creep or feature creep when it comes to putting out stuff. Why doesn't LL put this out? Why don't you guys do this or this or this or this? Just to even imagine like the Hex ecosystem. Imagine everyone's like first, do your little Twilight flashback to the first time you heard about Hex. Imagine that pitch, right? And then I was like, all right, so check this out. If you use an HSI stake, now it's an NFT. That NFT is transferable, but you can then also take that up and put it up into an auction site. There's this airdrop called Hedron. Hedron can be moved into and their head would explode, right?
Right.
Don't worry. Oh, there's also pool stakes with the maxi. Like you would just literally.
Which is why we love it, but like it would push everyone.
Exactly. So even the way all this great stuff is like come out on Hex, I actually think in a funny way, if all the cool stuff that like Dipcatcher and Alex and Goldkey and all those goons had done, if that had happened 3 months after Hex, I think that stuff would have been price negative. It would have made this stuff really, really undigestible. So that stuff coming out the way it does is actually really, really helpful. So some of that, again, is like, that's just all that kind of stuff all plays with some of the similar psychology of, hey, you understand that there's ETH, there's stuff get built on top. Let me show you a better version of ETH. Oh, okay. And you get to be early. Okay, I'm in.
Yeah.
Great. So once you do that, now it's like the next domino is, LL, understanding PulseX, some liquidity, like all this other great stuff, right? And that's something that I noticed a lot at Consensus was a lot of the outside money. And I'm going to keep bringing this up because I feel like this will resonate and other people will end up doing a really good job with the sentiment in whatever field they are in. A lot of that money is not scared of crypto. They're scared of which crypto and where to put it. They know crypto's the way. They know this stuff is coming. They know the gains are big. They know the yield is big. They realize we're crushing all kinds of outside stuff, that this is like the fax machine before email. They understand. They just don't know how to tell the difference between Squid Games and Pepe, between Hex and whatever. Like they just don't know how to tell these things apart. That's where there's a lot of value right now. I think that there's 2 things that I think are kind of like people should have in the back of their heads that are important. One is that money understands that crypto's where to come. They just don't know where to put it. So figure out your language and go help those guys out. It'll make everybody's bag go up and you'll be a very rich guy if you're good at it. The other one that I think crypto needs to splash a little cold water on is there is, like when we talk about like institutional money coming, we forget who the institutions are. Those guys are not dumb. Jamie Dimon might say stupid stuff at JP Morgan, but there's an entire floor at NYC full of guys making 6 figures who are ruthless, savage, autistic killers who crush other industries. That's what they do for a living. Mm-hmm. There's some guy sitting at the front with a $5,000 Armani suit, and he has a war machine of analysts. Those guys are going to come to crypto, and they are way better at some of these things than any of us are individually, and people need to sharpen up some. That will come with this next bull cycle. We've seen it a little bit when you saw things like Luna collapsing. That was really well handled by a few different players. That wasn't a one-off thing coming. So Luna was very, very exposed and huge. So it was a giant pot of money to go hit. But there are a lot of very sophisticated and smart players that will be coming into crypto over this next bull cycles. And it's not to scare anybody off. It's just add it to the calculus, right? that I think that one, there's a lot of money coming in, people who can help guide those people and explain these things, work on language. There's a lot of value to be had there. And then smart people and sharper markets are coming to the space. And just to be kind of forward thinking on that.
Yeah.
Do you think that, what's your general feel from being at, places like Consensus? Do you feel like the appetite there is only growing with legislation coming in place? How do you think legislation is going to affect things?
I was also going to ask that question too. If you could touch a little about the some of the FUD around stablecoin legislation too. We've been seeing that kind of floating around on Twitter by certain other people. And I would love to hear your perspective on that, on the 2024 legislation that's coming out. Would love to hear about that too.
Sure. I think there's a lot of parallels between crypto and actually like the marijuana industry, funny enough, because there's this like prohibition phase. There's even some similars in almost the demographics, right? So everybody who like wants like that legislation passed, there was a lot of idealists who were like, oh, it's medicinal. They liked all these properties. There's a lot of healing stuff, right? And I'm not talking about anyone's personal opinion. Like we're just looking at this objectively as an industry, right?
Right.
There's this subset of like idealists who think this stuff's the greatest thing ever. They want to do this. They want to do that with it. They think cannabinoids are fantastic, all this kind of stuff, right? They're like, I don't know, 10%. And then you have this other like 80% that's like recreational, and that's where all the money is. And so I think we see that in crypto, right? There's some subset that are very idealistic, that love the tech, that love DeFi, that love this, that love that. And then like 80% of it is still like NFT memes and all that kind of good stuff, which again, it's its own baby. It's fine. It's not my cup of tea, but I don't hate it all. I try to be very neutral on that stuff. Now I think that kind of shows the parallels in the same way that they went through some things where when the regulation was like very, very sticky and in certain places, you had people trying to be, not aggressive, would you say? Some combination, I guess bold. Bold's probably a more neutral word. Bold in how they try to operate businesses and do certain things. Some got bit, some didn't. And I think that as legislation became clearer, you saw an influx, but there were a lot of people ready to go. And something that happened in that space also was there was a ton of jockeying over how it would become legal or legalized or regulated because on the outside, people just wanted the product. They didn't really care, right? Yeah, so if you ask most crypto users, they're like, yeah, just give it to me. I don't care, right? Like most like regulation, especially a lot of this financial stuff, doesn't really bump into that many average people that often, right? So like for most users, if they could put in $500, I don't know, make 20x, pull out 10 grand of their bank account, they'd be excited. They would care less, right? Like all you guys can talk about bill this and that and lemons, I don't care. Like they wouldn't really mind, right? So where you saw some of the issues with like that market was they're like, okay, we'll legalize it, but we're only going to offer like 5 licenses. And so they would try to basically add barriers to entry and basically hand it to big business or companies that were, on the right side of whatever XYZ thing, right? You just a combination between, okay, it's not banned. You just have to go follow these procedures. How do you follow procedures? I'll figure it out. Like I'm sure everyone can already start to see some of these parallels, right? So I think that we'll see a lot of trends similar in the US to like what you'd see with marijuana, where there's these individual pockets of places that it's more accepted, less accepted, more draconian, less draconian. And so I think we'll see a big mix. So on the current stuff, I think we're going to see a lot of these pockets of things. So Florida, I think it was like South Carolina or Wyoming. I hadn't seen the last one. Another one, they put out anti-CBDC legislation.
I've been seeing that.
Yep. I don't actually think it's particularly effective, but I think it's sentiment, right? And sentiment's important. So I think that we'll see a lot of jockeying in the US. A few things that I would put out is that with Bill 118, which I think has no chance of being at all passed anywhere close to what it is now, but I think they were trying to move the pendulum a little bit. They brought up state issuers. And so that hasn't really been discussed. And then it got sprinkled in that stablecoin hearing right before Gary got grilled. So everyone forgot about that one because Gary's way more interesting for most people. So you heard some issues with state issuers. So I think something that most of us haven't really thought about on the stablecoin side is that this is actually a bit of like a federalism issue in the states, where I think one of their concern isn't necessarily Coinbase doing XYZ thing, but Texas doing something. I don't think they want to see smaller regional banks. So like Texas takes a similar architecture to like Coinbase, and now there's a Texas dollar. I don't think they want that kind of stuff. So I think that I bring this up a lot of times. Sometimes we think about crypto very much through a crypto specific lens and not realize that like, hey, this stuff gets used in the real world. And so I think with the stable coins, I don't think we've even sort of like got to the bottom of it yet when it comes to some of the regulation stuff. And I think part of the reason that it's messy for all the reasons that we would bring up: bias, corruption, Gary. There's some level of truth to all that. I think most of all those individual topics at the top are exaggerated, but there's some element of truth to all of that. But I think a big part of it is that additional money and ways that stuff gets controlled is really tricky in a very complex economy. And so I've more than once in trying to like piece through some of these things, I'll read something, understand, and almost understand, hey, that's over my head. There's something to this that I'm not really aware of. So like some of that like federalism issues, when I saw that they brought up like state issuance, they hadn't done that in any previous bill. And I don't know exactly what the concerns or how it would break down, but I got just enough to realize like, okay, this is the edge of my understanding here somewhere. There's going to be a fight about this. This got brought up in some dark room. Somebody brought this up. Some state flashed they'd be willing to do this. And there's an issue I'm unaware of here. So I think in the US, there'll be a lot of, I don't want to say scare tactics, but there's a lot of jockeying. Like even like we talk about the SEC and the government, those are two different things. Gary and the SEC are two different things. This guy named Gary, who no one ever heard of, and now is getting his big 50 minutes of fame. That matters to people, man. Like that guy's a bureaucrat, and now he's famous as hell. Like if you're talking about in the scope of being a government employee, that dude's a rock star. So he's got his own interest, right? Like, so I think we look at these things one way to like monolithic, and that we also think about them too crypto specific, because I think a lot of the why are they so after stable coins, how do these things shake out, are going to have almost nothing to do with actual crypto, but how that will affect, again, federalism at state issuance, regional banking, some of these other things that we don't even really think of. We just say banks, we just say government, we just say SEC, and there's a lot of different parties and participants in there.
It's really unpeeling back the layers of the onion to see what the real intent is.
And again, there's multiple. That's kind of what I was getting. There's even multiple intents, because that's a lot of different parties, man. Like Texas doesn't care what Oklahoma's doing. Texas will cheer things over the U.S. I say Texas because that's where I'm from. Gary might want to do something that's anti-SEC because it gets him 15 more minutes of fame. SEC tries to fight with the CFIC because they want control, they want more funding, and all these things. So there's a lot of just jockeying between all these participants that on crypto we just see as the other side. And so that's where I think some of these things, even where like all the regulations confusing, it is, but some of that is because it's coming out from, what have there been, a dozen different senators sponsor different bills from a dozen different backgrounds, some that want to attach this, some want this, some want that, some want here. Elizabeth Warren wants to like dump cold water. Sherman doesn't understand that we don't collect stamps. I don't know how old that guy is. And then you got, a lot more progressive thinkers. And so like, like we're hearing all these other voices, and I think that's really what a lot of the stablecoin stuff will come down to, is it'll have less to do with crypto than we think it will. But I really don't think we're that close to shaking it down. I think that they will put, honestly, probably some reasonable level of regulation out in the next, I don't think it'll be that fast. I think they'll probably pass something maybe before the end of the year that won't go into effect for another year or so, maybe even more, or even be scaled in the way they do some of these, like with like carbon or different like threat points to hit, like, hey, we're going to have XYZ tax up till XYZ time. You have to meet these kind of thresholds and it'll be progressive. I think we'll end up seeing something closer to that by the end of it.
I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. What are you guys doing to hedge? I mean, is there anything you can do at Liquid Loans to hedge risk right now as far as legislation is concerned, or just being open-minded in general to see what the future holds?
There's a lot of things to be careful on as far as sort of more of like fringe stuff, right? So we're kind of careful about trying to take like, what would you say? I always like to use that term like a 0 and a 1. If we do something and there's zero risk, and then there's something that's like a really small risk, we try to do zero risk kind of stuff on a lot of the edge things. Mostly with the legislation, it's about just being very, very aware and being flexible. And we have some unique stuff that it's funny. I think too often people are more concerned about regulation hitting LL when I when I actually think if the regulation goes far enough that it will affect LL in the way people think, we got way bigger problems, honestly. So like one of them is with some of the things around like DeFi and reporting on like tax side of stuff. So for LL, it's really not that big a deal because there's no commingling. These things are all siloed. So if you open up a vault, no one else interacts with the vault. It's just you and your own issuance. So like it'd be relatively easy to do self-reporting. You don't have to, you're not working with like a pool in any form, or again, even setting up like a jurisdictional front end that makes more sense for like US users. So that's not that big a deal, but it's a huge deal if we get to that because it breaks all kinds of other stuff. And the ancillary effects will be way bigger to LL than like sort of how it affects us directly. The stablecoin stuff definitely could, but it just is what it is. There's a few things about naming, and I brought this up a few times that we may just have to stop calling it a stablecoin. Funny enough, like I brought this up a few times with Hex before RH and some of those guys that like really jumped on it. I'm very glad they did that. Hey, like that's not staking. And it's not, let me pierce through that a little bit because I feel like this is one of those things that gets a lot of people like upset and I don't feel like they understand both sides.
So you're right. The wording's everything.
It is. And it's sometimes people will look at that and be like, oh, you're just like playing name games, trying to get away with something kind of vibe. And I understand that. It's like
name games work.
They work, but that's like also what this is, right? So one of the things is like, if you trust a business, you can't call it a trust. A trust means something very, very specific. So you can say, I trust the business. I'm trusting in that business. That business is trustful. That business is trustworthy. But you can't call it a trust. A trust is something very specific, right? And it's the same kind of issue here where you don't have to change any of the mechanics. We're not actually staking, but calling it shoveling and trying to get away. It's like, no, it actually isn't staking the way that word is used legally in those frameworks, right? So It's not, we're calling it something different. We're trying to call it what it is. And that's important, right? And it's the same thing with like stablecoin. So in almost everywhere, there's a lot of different parties between the US, UK, Australia, US, UK, Australia, and the United States on like how they use some of this verbiage. But stablecoin almost uniformly means payment stablecoin, which is fiat backed. And that's what their biggest concern is. And so one of the issues that we will kind of have is that I'm concerned that at some point they're basically going to do this with the machete rather than a scalpel. And that, hey, we're going to absolutely regulate just the hell out of something like Coinbase, Paxos, all these kind of issuers and say that everything else is a problem. That I have some concerns with at some point. But so like some of the stuff we're working on is like, okay, if stablecoin really means payment stablecoin, then we need to refer to USDL as something different. So that's a few things that I've worked on in the background. I don't think she would consider herself a lobbyist, but I think all of us would just refer to her loosely as a lobbyist for Lumens. I was able to give her some points and sort of like get my opinion through to her that whether it did anything at all, I'll never know. But those are some of those things we're trying to participate with on something in the background, at least making sure like, hey, here's what this means in crypto. Here's what you guys are saying. This is why these things don't make sense. And so like if people have looked at a lot of the things like the SEC has filed or even bill proposals, this is the least fun thing ever. You actually have to go read the filings because the language in the briefs won't tell you what they mean. So if you guys remember, like, do you remember when there was that little spun going around where like Gary Gensler said that mining hardware is a security and this and that, and everybody was giving him a hard time? Yeah, kind of. If you read the brief on the Greenpeace deal, that's what it looks like. But if you go read the filing, that's not what they said. What they said is you sold a security masquerading as hardware. It's still fraud. It's still a security, right? So I actually agreed with that opinion on the Greenpeace. My only kind of concern was I feel like they were trying to get some creep into saying these things are security so they have more jurisdictional sort of umbrella in the future. Just fraud. Just charge those guys with frauds. They were assholes. Like they did bad stuff. They charged stuff. They didn't come through. It wasn't what they said it was. X, Y, Z, all these kinds of concerns. Like they defrauded people. People lost money. It wasn't what they said it was. Go charge them with fraud. Go do that stuff, right? We don't have to get into the rest of this. So that was kind of on the deal in Greenpeace. But people, if you read the brief, if you didn't look at if you didn't go look at what they really said, that's why people had a lot of concern with that and thought it was like Gary Gensler said your graphics card's a security. It's like, again, I'm not a big fan of those guys, but that's not what it said. But what we're getting to is that language is really important. So that would be, again, to kind of do our full circle back. That's one of the things we're looking at is some of this just vocabulary is really important, because if you call something, and then in the future they say, hey, that's something is this. You say, oh, that's not what we are. And they say, well, you called it that for 3 years. So yeah, it is. That's some of the concerns that we're trying to be cautious of. But again, it's murky waters. You really just try to ride the waves best you can, be forthcoming, all that kind of good stuff, and handle things the right way.
No, very cool. So as far as liquid loans, as far as I'm concerned anyways, it sounds like liquid loans will be launching a few months after Pulsechain is around, after some of the volatility is worn off and some of that stuff. Is that still the plan?
100%. So it'll take time for you want to have just basically some like seasoning on all kinds of things, right? So you just want to make sure that one, just everything's up running nice and clean. There's no extra issues on top of anything that might affect, transactions and stuff like that. You want to make sure liquidity pools have gained some size. There's a little bit of longevity, the price volatility, all that sort of initial stuff all shakes out. And then you can launch cleanly. You want to have a lot of validators, reporters up on the Oracle. You just want to make sure that, again, it comes out and that it's like, okay, everything is the crypto version of stable and clean. And then you drop in LL.
Cool. That'll be fun. There's a lot of people, if I'm not mistaken, I think that Liquid Loans was the largest sacrifice of anything not an RH project. So a lot of people are really, really bullish and excited. Are there any Liquid Loan strategies? There's been a ton that have been put out. Is there any, is there a Wallrus one or any ones that that you like that you're looking forward to?
So
I don't think he's DJing enough for a Wallrus strategy.
Yeah, the Wallrus strategy would be really boring, right?
Right.
There's a couple, and that's something that, again, on trying to be hedging and careful is like strategies and coaching to some degree. I do have some cool ways that we want to put out some content that I think will help with some of that like more clear direction.
Yeah, very good.
But a few of the things are maybe this is like a framing that I think helps is I think too often it gets looked at as like what'd you say? Like just like an actual loan. And again, it's DeFi. You don't have to ask me how to do anything. You do whatever you want with it, right? Where I think that I would sort of like add to the conversation as far as like what would a Wallrus strategy be, or what would I kind of like look at using it as look at like let's assume again these things do all we think, right? You put in a chunk, now you have a big chunk with a bunch of X's, all this kind of stuff. You do want to hold and you want to have exposure to all that pulse price, but you also don't want to have a giant bag of money that's doing anything, right? So like Corey, like why do you have your money in real estate? Because then your money's working for you, right? All these types of things. So you don't want to you don't want to, especially if you're any of these guys that are looking for generational level up from middle class, any of these kind of things where you're like trying to get to another tier or trying to accomplish something that's outside of kind of what you've done now. I think that's where you have because that means you have long time horizons, you have big goals, you want to be careful, your principal gets higher, you don't really want to risk those things. Looking at LL as a way to like, hey, how do I take a bunch of dormant capital and get access to all these different yield opportunities? That's what I think would be added to the conversation. So I think too often people look at something like collateral level and ratio and say, okay, where can I set it so that it's safe that no matter whatever happens, it doesn't break? There's a way to use it that way, but also, okay, if you can get access to a larger chunk of that, do XYZ thing with it. And then as that ratio becomes closer, you just add back to the position. So again, there'll be more specifics. There's a couple of things I want to highlight. I've been trying to look through some ways to like put out some of that content that's something between educational and coaching. Again, that's never my thing. I don't make forward-facing price calls. I never make price predictions. I don't tell people what I'm buying. That stuff's not to be aloof. One, everybody does that stuff's always wrong. And I'm definitely not better than any of the guys who are doing it now and missing. But
and everyone's doing it.
And people good options. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I do want to I think what I'll end up doing is like highlighting some people and some wallets that have done stuff really, really well so that you can say like, hey, this seems to work really well. This seems to work really well. And that way people have the choice. And some of that again is like my disposition. So part of the reason I talked about earlier that like I don't do a lot of like meme coin stuff, mostly it's because that stuff's just not that easy for me. Like we talked about earlier, like I'm an obsessive guy. I dive into things really heavily. So for me, I end up making bigger bets on things that I feel really, really confident in, but that's my disposition, right? So like that stuff's easier for me. And I also know that like sort of how I invest and do things in crypto is never going to be like the highest of EV. So if you go follow, I don't know, 10 people that are as smart or as dumb as me, however you want to quantify it, there's definitely ways those guys will act that will make more than me. I know that, and I'm fine with that. Like that. So that upper edge of like ranges of distribution has never been my goal, for a lot of different reasons. But you can do the meme coin thing and like say, hey, I'm going to put 10% of my bag on 10 things. 6 go bust, 3 don't make money. 1 goes up 100x, and you're up a ton, right? I can't do that well. That is not my disposition. I would lose my mind. I'd tear out any hair I had left. I'd end up with patches in my beard over those misses. Even if I made more money, then I bet on 3 things, they all went up 5x. The other guy made more money, but I would be less happy. I would not handle that well. It's not in my disposition. So there's a lot of these things that I do or speak about that I always like, hey, there are ways to make more money, but that's not my goal. I like to sort of operate in a inside of a certain comfort zone. There's things that I do well, and there's also just strategies that I know my disposition, mental acuity, all these things. I'll just end up net beneficial. If I try to go do the meme coin game, I'll be that little top you see on a Pepe, or the last guy who bought Squid Games. That would be me, and so I just can't do that. That's not my game.
Sure.
So a lot of the stuff with like the LL strategy is and how I'll use some of these things is also similar to that.
It is.
There's ways to make more funds. There's ways to do this. There's ways to do that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much going to be in a tight range, almost like a poker player.
I love it. Talk a little bit about, are you guys the one kind of spearheading the teller reporter for nodes? I'm going to be running a node validator.
Yep.
Obviously, if I'm already running the node validator on my computer, I should run a teller node, right? And so why wouldn't I, right? It's more money. Like,
yeah. So we're going to have a ton of that coming out this next week. Yeah. That'll be, we basically have this like slingshot pullback. We're going to have a lot of the documentation out on that, all the structure stuff. It'll be integrated into this version of the DApp. So like this DApp will be like, hey, this is what it is. It is live. We'll have our little bit of a facelift on it. We're really excited about.
It's not going to be called Teller, right? It'll be called something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That name is part of this big release. We're going to kind of basically just all the chips will be shoved in here.
You can release it on the show if you want right now, bro.
Yeah, we're ready.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I might need a job then. So we'll have that up really quickly. But just briefly, there is tokenomics. There would be some really cool stuff.
Cool.
Nobody has forgot the one that we brought to the dance. So a lot of people who have already been supporters will be pretty happy. There's some really cool stuff coming with it. The biggest thing is that, as you just mentioned, I'm really glad you said that. If you're already running hardware, it's basically the same stuff. And teller reporters function really similar. That ecosystem works really similar to like validators, in that there's all these reporters. They can object to a price, agree on price. Like it works really similar to like a proof of stake network in that sense. And we like that architecture a lot better than something like Chainlink. And again, Chainlink didn't want to come over. There's other reasons that went along with that. But that side of the decentralized Oracle was really, really cool stuff. It'll be something that, again, we hope other projects will pick up very quickly. A few have already spoken on that. I just don't know how publicly they've been on it. So I'll let them guys kind of do their own announcements on it. But that's a really big one. It's really powerful. It's cool stuff. Everyone will be able to participate. You don't have to ask. Go look it up, run it yourself. Especially again, if you're ordering hardware, why not?
Yeah, I'm super bullish about that. One other part that are you guys going to bring over chicken bones?
Chicken bonds?
Oh, that's it. Chicken bonds. Yeah, from the liquidity fork. I played with that for about 2 months, and I couldn't make no money out of it. So I cashed my position out, and
I don't particularly care for it. I liked what the goal was, and I thought it was interesting. But we were never that big on it. Part of it is where some of that sell pressure ends up.
I don't think it works.
It worked for a little while. And
yeah,
so
always the first guys, right? If you're first in, you're going to make some money. But then like after that point, it's like, I mean, you don't lose because you're able to get your money back at any time, which was like the attractive part.
Sure.
But then like your money's in there and it's not doing nothing. You're like, all right, well.
I think it's margin call. I always get all those like late 90s, early 2000s, like stock market movies all confused. But when the big killer comes in at the VC firm, he sits down at the front and he's like, speak to me as you would a young child or a golden retriever. That's where I'm at on a lot of this stuff, where some of the stuff with chicken bones, again, a lot of the goals and stuff were really interesting, but the math and the code underlying it was actually pretty difficult stuff. So it's very impressive from a, like a computer science idea. If you're like, hey, you wrote this, like if I was going to grade that as like a report, I'd be like, holy hell, this thing's incredible, right? But some of it got to where me personally, I mean, again, I got to call a spade a spade. Everybody knows I'm not a dev. My level of math at some point becomes a shortcoming, and I just honestly could not get through it to the point that I would have felt comfortable with, me personally. And then again, sort of the company view was give it some Lindy time. It didn't seem like it's worked out as well here recently. And again, where it applied some sell pressure we weren't very happy with. So I think there are some iterations, variations of that'll come from that. So I think it was a valuable experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think there will be stuff that comes out of it.
Yeah, I think something could beautiful down the road could come out of it.
That's pretty much where we are. The close, not perfect, some interesting stuff, some great execution, some beautiful code, but that specifically is not something we would want.
I love it.
Yeah. How close do you think we actually are to Pulsechain launch?
Oh boy, this ain't a price call, but we could be a timing call.
Something between 4 minutes ago, and we missed the tweet to 2024.
Yeah, sure. So you'd be really surprised if it pushed out past 2023.
I mean, it's one of those things like not just with Pulsechain, but I made this thing a few times. Again, as we kind of discussed, I'm kind of vanilla. I'm in the middle on a lot of this stuff where I'm like, oh, it's not that bad, but it's not that great. I end up like kind of being between like a 4 and a 6 on almost everything.
You're Switzerland.
Right. I actually appreciate that. I'll take that. That's a good one, man. I like Switzerland. Cheese is decent,
Right.
It's all good, right? The point is, though, is that being sort of grounded meant that I was wrong about like everything that's happened for like a year and a half. So it's like, what do you think about FTX? I'm like, oh, I don't really like exchanges. They're kind of offshore. It's this or that. If I would have guessed, hey, it's a meth patch orgy crazy thing where there's billions exploding and being, ran through with money wire transfer frauds, I'd have been like, no, I don't think that's what's happening, man. That seems crazy to me. But here we are, right? So like, so much stuff has been so crazy that I'm like, oh, well, that was not on my bingo board. I was off. Again, so with so much of this stuff, I end up being graphed. So like, I almost always I'm going to kind of repeat the no more rhetoric. Seems like as far as the network itself, with that really cool pressure test that like Poseidon, Pulse Chat, all those guys did, getting out to like almost 5 million transactions, which is
that's insane.
Super cool. It's really cool stuff.
Oh.
So with those guys doing that big pressure test, Shanghai's out, the withdrawals are on network. It's kind of one of those. And again, I'm just really echoing Arch's last sentiment. Seems like what else could you do there? The only things left is like the PulseX stuff. We don't have all the features added back on the front end there. So maybe they start to unwind those over the next couple of weeks. But if you kind of go all the way back, that stuff wasn't really MVP. So maybe this is one of those things they want to roll it out because of so like if some of the wallets and things don't have oracles up, like Teller, they use RPCs. That's something that Brett made a comment that like the RPCs aren't as accurate. So that's some of the reasons that you had to add like that padding to gas fees, like why there were transaction failures. So maybe one of the things is you roll out the network, everything's nice and sturdy, minimal features, get everything up and going, allow some of this infrastructure, GraphQL, archive nodes, all this stuff to get synced up. Some of the stuff that we've talked about with like why it takes us time to launch. You get all that stuff up and then add the features to PulseX, say it's kind of a drip. I mean, that's possible. I mean, that's never been, by the way, none of that has been what those guys have said. That's just me kind of reading some of the tea leaves there.
Yeah.
But that would make sense to me. So again, to kind of bring it back to the original question, I mean, it's up and running right now, right? So you could just launch. But again, how much time those guys take, there's no telling.
Yeah, I love that we had pushed 5 million transactions in a day because it was so just cool, like 2 weeks before that, the Zen community was like, oh, we're going to break Pulsechain when it comes out. Oh, good luck breaking it now. We just pushed it to its all-time limits. It was awesome.
Man, those I've never seen more communities with so much overlap that just seem to just dislike
and then hate each other too. So absolutely, you're just at each other's throats all day and the FUD back and forth. I'm just like, holy crap, it's insane.
And one of the other things too is like so many people that I really resonate with a lot of what they say. At least once on like again, a lot of that have just said really, really rough stuff, and I'm like, wow, this was a lot of character, man. Like,
right,
that's a person on the other side of the screen, right? Like. that guy probably just bought Chick-fil-A, man. And like, that's what you want to say to him? That seems rough. But,
he's got a daughter. Like,
yeah,
really? Like,
you guys probably like the same football team. Like, you want to settle down a bit. So there, I know there's been some rough lows kind of between there, but yeah, I think that stuff's overblown a little bit. People should just be nice.
It is.
Yeah. Well, we've had a really well-attended show. Tons of people in the comments saying that they were just pumped to hear from you. So we appreciate you being on the show. How could people find you guys? How can they get more information about Liquid Loans if they want it?
Yeah. So liquidloans.io is the site, obviously. Same thing as the YouTube channel. That right there, it's Wallrus Official on Twitter. Then the same username on Telegram. But we're pretty much, we try to be all over the place. Everyone's always welcome to reach out, all that kind of good stuff. We've been a little slow over this last like week and a half. Me trying to get some rest, recovering a bit from traveling, all this extra stuff. And then we're really gearing up. Like we're ready to get some stuff out. So we've been going over doing all our internal QA and all this stuff. Cause like our release is really, really close. And it's not just, hey, here's our DApp. It's a lot. Like we have a lot coming at. Actually, we have all.
Is it all going to be on testnet theoretically if we don't see mainnet before the push?
It'll be on testnet regardless. So
yeah, because it'll be a little
that's actually a good topic. We can touch on that real quick. So so testnet v4 stays up. Like that's the testnet, right? So no matter what happened, if post launch before we got off the stream, that doesn't really change what LL's doing at all. Like we're still going to come out on testnet. Everyone's still going to test it. It's still going to have all that time in the market, all that kind of good stuff. And so all of those things will be the same. And we want it to be up so that people can also test and explore, right? So even if even after mainnet, like we'll keep that stuff running because maybe you want to try these strategies out with fake money and not have to do them on the real side. Like we'd love to be able to walk people through, or so like say you guys have some onboards, right? Cool. Yeah. Hop on the testnet with us. And you go through, they can get on there and play and do all that stuff like live click, just like they would on mainnet, but they have no money risk, right? So like on our site, we have, if you go through the desktop, through the website, you can see all that front end and there's all the explainer videos on there. So they can actually click an explainer video, then actually click stability pool and actually put funds in there. They can do all that stuff. So that'll all be up on testnet. No matter what anything goes on, there'll be plenty of testing. We want our own testing, want community to touch stuff. And that's a tool we want everyone to have in the future. So we have seasoning time before mainnet regardless. So all our stuff will be up on testnet, audits, clear, touch it, break it, come yell at us. All that stuff will be up there no matter what goes on. And it'll be up there well after mainnet and everything as well.
Very cool. Very cool. So that'll be a great opportunity. Everyone can go and explore and check things out. We really appreciate you being on today, Wallrus. Are there any?
It's a pleasure, guys.
Parting words.
Very, very thankful
you want to make sure you shield while we're here.
One more time.
I said, is there any parting words or extra things you want to make sure you shield while you're here?
I just really appreciate the invitation, guys. Corey, thanks for reaching out, man. I've seen some of your guys' stuff before, some of your guys' commentary on Twitter. I think I've talked to you guys at least a little bit back and forth in some spaces as well. So
yeah, we have.
Yeah, it's always just get a chance to actually meet and speak to people.
So you're one of the big gigabrains in the space, man. I look up to you, and like I said, I've been my ear every time you're talking in a space, YouTube, no matter what, because I always learn something. And why I have you here, I'll ask about one more DJing question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want, but man, you like I said, you have the smarts to maybe figure this out. What do you think of EHEX and PHEX? Do you think they rock and roll together and reach some kind of parity, or do you think one's gonna dominate over the other? Do you think one is, what's your thoughts? You don't have to answer it if you don't want, because I know that's kind of a controversial topic in the community.
So sometimes that's another one of those things where it's like kind of tough, because if it's if you put out negative sentiment, they become emergent, right? So like, let's say that EHEX was gonna, like, PHEX was gonna fail. EHEX was actually the greatest thing ever. It was gonna do that. Well, if we say that, like, you make it so that's one of those things where it's hard to comment on some of those. A few of the things I guess I could kind of like put out to the ether, and then everyone can kind of pick and choose what they resonate with, see if it's anything valuable. One is, at the time of the fork, be careful with how you swap PHEX. That pool is going to be super interacted with, and it's going to be super thin. So it is going to be like, how big a splash can you make jumping into a gallon bucket as a grown man? Like, you will blast
That
thing.
is it, dude.
Like, be careful with that. And so that's the first one, is just P-Hex is a bad tool to use for getting into Pulse and PulseX immediately.
100%.
Thank you for saying that.
We've been saying that for months.
Yep. It just is about, and the other part is, again, the principle is more important than the copies in the beginning. So
in the beginning,
if you're buying Hex and you think P-Hex and you're taking a Hexagon mind state that 6 months, year, 2 years, 15 years, all that kind of stuff for P-Hex, perfect, great.
Yeah, because you love the asset.
Yeah, exactly. Then buy it up, buy Hex ahead of time. All that stuff is true. Like, Hex is not different in that sense as far as its value proposition. I'm talking about specifically as an instrument. I'm talking about as an ERC20 that just has a hash stamp, using it to do something. This is a case where it's a poor choice. So one, it particularly is just bad from just a swapping mechanic, knowing it's going to be hyper interacted with. Now, the other part is, if you want the degen play, if something is very likely to be interacted with and very thin, that means volatility. Volatility means opportunity. So if you are the smart person on the other side of the screen, there are going to be, if I was a gambling man, there will be unbelievable, unthinkable entries to be able to snag. Maybe not huge, massive buys, but there will be unbelievable buying opportunities on P-Hex early, because people aren't going to listen, and you're going to see that thing spike and jump and spike and jump. So don't do it because I told you. Do it because you're already competent, already knew that was coming, and you just were working through it. You do it if you know what you're doing. I'm not telling them to do that, but like, that is going to be a real idea. The other is, if you're unsure about E-Hex and P-Hex, and you like both, especially, you can hold them at the fork. But again, if we're talking about, I'm not talking about these things as the long term. I'm talking about like how to handle around the launch specifically. If you hold E-Hex, which means you'd hold P-Hex, you don't really have ways to take advantage of the price mechanic, right? But if you're holding stables or something outside of that, and then you see a drop either way, that's what gives you an opportunity to take advantage and like buy the dip on whatever these things happen. So another like option is, I'm not sure what any of these things are going to do, but I want to buy the cheap one, right? So that happens in a lot of, again, for like people, if they're like football players or like fantasy kind of stuff, and drafting, any of that kind of things. If I'm unsure, I just want the cheap one, right? So I talk about that a lot with some of the value proposition on what I'm going to invest in or what I'm looking at doing. Like Pulse or PulseX, which one do I think is going to be better? All right, I would lean Pulse, all the normal native coin, blah, 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 right? Okay, but it like, am I 3-to-1 sure? Maybe. But if you're going to give me 5, 6, 7-to-1, like I'm just not smart enough to know, and I'm going to take the cheap one, right? So I think there's that same thing around E-Hex and P-Hex, where if you just like Hex, just let the market tell you which one's cheap and then go get that one, right? So if you have a 10-year, 5-year, you have that long-term horizon that a lot of hexagons do, what do you care what happens the next 6 months? Just buy the cheap one.
Love that.
So that would be where I would. Sentiment. Yeah, that's where I would. That's where I would add.
This is why I love you, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like a good game theory thing. Like, if you look at, again, this is something I like to take from fantasy football a lot. They talk about like tiers, right? So if you're a football guy and you're like, all right, Christian McCaffrey, elite grade A running back. Jonathan Taylor, elite grade A running back. Bijan is going to be a top guy. All right, which one of the three do I want? None. I just want to pick the third one because that's going to give you the next best selection. So you guys pay the premium to pick. I'm going to basically take the cheap one to give you guys your option. So I'll just take the third one because I want the quicker pick the next time around. So the same thing with like E-Hex, P-Hex, Pulse, PulseX, some of these things. I think all these things will go up and do productive stuff. So I'm just going to take the cheap one because I don't know which one goes up the highest. So like within reason, if I don't have better reasons, I let everybody else choose and take the least expensive inside of a tier.
I love that. That was probably one of the best answers I've ever heard to that question.
Agreed. Money. Well, appreciate you having we appreciate having you on today. Guys. Thanks for that, and we'll have to have you back on after Pulse launches. We talk more liquid loan stuff.
Oh man, we can really get in the weeds then when we start.
Yeah, absolutely. Data. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to, guys. And the same thing, I made that shout out for content creators in general. One, whoever's listening, make sure you're supporting these guys. Like retweet, streams. I'm going to make sure I share out their YouTube channel as soon as we get off here. That stuff is important. Like, there's just for a million reasons. One, you want people that are interested and engaged, and that's part of the reason, talk about all these different voices and stuff like that. There's only so many people that I resonate with, but we want everybody else. Like, I don't care if they like me. I don't care if they don't resonate with my message. Like, give them another voice, right? Put them on to RG3, put them on to Maddie, put them on to Gary, put them on to whoever it is in the ecosystem you think will resonate. One of my favorite little quick stories just to walk out on, when I was at the Hex conference in Vegas, there was he's in some type of like hospital management, and it was kind of funny because he was trying not to hurt my feelings. He was expressing the idea. He was like, he's like, I wasn't even his like top 3 favorite like content guys in the space, but his top 3 guys were a bunch of crazy crypto goons. So he didn't feel comfortable telling the doctors to go listen to them. But he knew that I wasn't going to say something that was, I don't really cuss or any of that kind of stuff. So he was like, I use you to talk to the doctors, even though I'm not his favorite. That was a perfect example of what we're talking about. And so use all these people as, ways to like match up personalities, right? So if they're not DGen, they're more traditional finance, they like a little slower speak, they're more vanilla, they're more conservative, they're probably going to resonate, right? But, if they've got any of these bright color NFT, this, that, they play here, they're on 40 chains, they're just probably not going to resonate with my message as much. Like, pair them up with the right voice,
Right.
Yeah.
Well said.
But guys, man, again, thanks so much.
Thanks,
I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure talking with you guys. You guys do a lot of great stuff. So
appreciate it. Guys, hit the likes on your way out. Hit the bell notification. Help the algorithm pump all of our bags.
There
you go.
Absolutely. Cool, guys. Have a good day.
Yeah.